Hi everyone. So I'm Chris Godsmark. I've been a corporate finance advisor in this industry for too long, 25 years, and I've seen in that time, as you can imagine, the promise of fibre, the altnets coming along in the late 90s, the early 2000s, the booms and the busts, the promise of FTTH, which for a long time never materialized, and then of course in the last 15 years at different paces, FTTH becoming a reality in all markets. And the gentleman, I'm not sure where he was, who asked the very sort of pertinent question, you know, existing operators versus greenfield operators, we've actually got a great sort of tale of two businesses really in the room. And perhaps if I can get Carlos first, you to introduce yourself, and then Clayton to do the same.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. Well, I work in this company in Portugal. This is the incumbent company in Portugal since 1990. Okay, I started, don't look like, yes, I started in that period of digitalization, but the switching voice, okay. So the digitalization is something that we have in telco from ever, I guess. And at that time, our business was pulses, it was voice, is periods, okay? And then everything changed because voice was no longer a business, and the internet comes in the 2000. And we started to do what the common incumbents were doing at that time, what's the so-called copper upgrade. Copper upgrade was some kind of DSL technologies to move to data. But since the beginning, and business is a risk, and we take the risk. Since the beginning, we started to do a lot of calculations, a lot of planning. What if scenarios if the bandwidth continues to grow to strange and stupid values like 2 megabits per second, okay? And then 10, and then 50. And in 2006, we started to think about FTTH. We were early adopters. We started exactly with that. And since that time, we reached in Portugal. Everybody, of course, of our competitors had to do the same movement because no one competes against fiber. That's it. And today we have in Portugal about 90% of coverage. Only small rural areas are not covered with fiber. Only with marginal state aid, let's say in about less than 20% of that coverage. There are 3 regional operators with open networks, mainly dark fiber open networks. And in Portugal, everything started to be over fiber, because when you start this, you change all the ecosystem of the industry. People run away from copper. Industry run away from copper. The skills of copper will vanish, and people start to think about fiber. And then it goes to the buildings. Today, and in Portugal, the regulation is very important, and telcos should do a strong work with the regulators to change regulation to enhance and to enable the new networks and all those big buildings. You need to have a regulation. You need to have something to allow everybody to start to do everything over fiber. And that was our path, because once we got the fiber, we started to do business over the fiber. And I heard a lot of good experiences here today. And the question is the share of wallet of our customer. We can't sell only one service. We need to sell everything we can sell over the customer. And a brownfield operator has the advantage of the trust of the customer. Today in Portugal, we are selling energy. In the same invoice we pay, of course, we don't produce energy, but we are retailers of energy because, in fact, we are brokers of energy because we are a big consumption. We have a big consumption of energy, of course, in our central offices. So we got that position to have a broker position and resell energy. So our customers, when they buy energy, we offer them megabytes, okay, the double on the mobile phone, everything. So
it's all bundled in. Well, we'll come on to
the bundle.
What we're going to talk about how, in different ways, you financed your build. But Clayton, I'll just get you to tell us a little bit about where CityFibre is, and in a sense, both of you are major players in your respective markets, but in very different ways.
Sure, it'll surprise you that I did not start working at CityFibre in 1990. I've only been there for about 8 years, but that's 70% of the company's lifetime at this stage. We're a UK-focused altnet, as they say. We think we've probably passed that label now, and we're part of the infrastructure. But we're privately owned. We're rolling out fibre to about a third of the country. We're more or less halfway through that mission. So we look at you with some as our future in some sense, and much like in Portugal, we're a full stack operator, so we not only serve the consumer space, but kind of every vertical. We have a position much aligned to the sense that we should be serving every building, every library, every school. We even serve a park bench in one of our cities. So we think that fibre is, as you do, it's going to be the last network we'll ever build. It'll cover every single application. And we've structured ourselves to be a full-service telco off the back of that.
And the interesting thing is, I think people often talk about BT as what is a pension fund with a telecoms company attached to it. In the case of CityFibre, I mean, the amount of money and the amount of frogs you've had to kiss to raise money in the last sort of 8 years or more, you almost feel like a financing company with a telecoms company attached to it. And I guess the question would be, as you finish that build, and I think you are pretty much fully funded, how sort of central to your day-to-day existence has financing that build been? And I'm thinking particularly about not just, the money to put the spades in the ground, but also, how you look at the business plans, the sort of covenants you have to hit, all of that complex stuff that enables you to build those networks.
No, it's been a critical part of who we are, both in terms of structure, in terms of volume. We started life as a public company on the AIM market, and it became very clear that you couldn't be the kind of company we were if you were going to have to report quarterly. Infrastructure companies need to think in terms of decades, not quarterly results, and we needed to structure ourselves to do that. So we've been very lucky to find both equity partners that kind of have the same vision as us. We only have 4 shareholders. Some of them are, have billions and billions of pounds behind them. Others have a lot of money behind them, not just a few billions. And we've, very consciously taken quite a bit of equity from them, but leveraged ourselves significantly, right? We have a £4.9 billion debt facility, which we closed back in early 2022, when ZIRP was still a thing. Sometimes you have to be lucky rather than good. I think our timing was extremely lucky there. And we've used that to kind of build and roll out the network. But the structure of all of that has been forced us down the path of scale, forced us down the path of ensuring that we're kind of wholesale and we're addressing all of these markets. So the financing has aligned us not simply in terms of the ability to build, but also the outcomes that we have to hit. And the discipline of all of that has been super important as well. Last quarter, we were EBITDA positive. I know that's a somewhat strange thing when you're kind of shoveling money out the door at a rate of knots in terms of CapEx build. But it shows you that you can structure that company with an eye to returns for your investors in the future, very early in your lifetime.
And we'll come on to how you kind of look at returns. So I guess, Carlos, from you come from a completely different perspective. You're an incumbent. I mean, you're Portugal Telecom, effectively. you've had to sort of reinvent the network. How have you looked at, you obviously had the benefit of being in the company a long time. How has the company sort of looked at the returns on that investment over that period? Because you started with fibre at an early stage when my guess would be it was more expensive to roll out fibre perhaps than it is now when, you know, it's become a more commoditized product, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, you're right. At that time, the first OLT ports I bought cost about $9,000. Yeah, 9,000. Today we buy that for 200, something like that, okay? But in fact, it is something that I can share also with the company like CityFibre. In our case, it was a question of survival. At that time, we saw that it was impossible to survive without doing that kind of movement, and copper upgrade would be always burning money. Okay. And we have done those calculations, and the calculations in terms of business case in our situation was a business case between what if I stay in copper, what if I do in fiber, and of course a lot of beliefs in terms of evolution of the cost, evolution of the technology. All those calculations were even better in terms of reality, okay? And that was, of course, an upside for us. But
at the time you were doing that, sorry to interrupt, at the time you were doing that, you were very early in that journey, you know, and we obviously in the UK, we look at fibre penetration in total of probably 30% in the UK market, you know, and you know, the reality is if you go to Spain or you go to Portugal, I mean, you probably got 75, 80% of households actually connected, not just the 91% passed. So when you were looking at that early on, what were the, you know, it's interesting that in the UK, dare I say it, in Germany, they kicked the can down the road and tried to milk the kind of legacy cash flow, if you like. You were thinking, if I invest now, I can save money in the future. Is that right?
that was the first one, and the second one was, if I invest now, I'm going to be the early adopter, I'm going to be first in the market. Today, in Europe, we are on the top 3 countries with, in terms of coverage. We have more than 90% of the customers in Portugal with more than 100 megabits. With more than 100 megabits in terms of services, okay? It is a quite impulse, and Spain is the same. But the question is, all the incumbents are pressured, but the pressure is they have a copper cost structure. Companies like CityFibre needs to approach them and to show them the business case, or the what-if scenario, because once a company like CityFibre starts to build in fiber everywhere, I noticed that, and that is the right situation from our perspective. Fiber is done for B2B, B2C, for cell sites, for cameras, for smart cities, for everything. Fiber to everywhere. Those companies, or they build by their own, or they will gonna rent if they have a good value proposal from companies like CityFibre. Okay, and Germany, for instance, I know quite well Germany. Each country has its own problems. Germany has a problem. Germany has a huge copper network directly buried on the ground. So now when they want to pass optical fiber, they don't have infrastructure. And Germans don't want to see poles. British have poles.
Poles as in telegraph poles, rather.
Yeah, telegraph poles. In Germany, that is something, you can't speak about that. In Portugal, I say they are beautiful. Okay? So the big question, in fact, in fiber, it's basic infrastructure. Where can I lay my optical fiber? If you have a strong duct network, if you have a strong pole network, if you have good regulated offers like we have in Portugal, and I know there are in UK also, it will allow you to deploy faster, because the question is not only money, it's the speed of implementation, it's the industrialization of the process. You need to get a good cost, because to get that you need to industrialize your process, and I guess that is what CityFibre
Well,
is
it's
doing.
a great question for Clayton, isn't it? Because obviously we've known each other very well for quite a number of years, right? And your build strategy, and therefore the cost of that build, has evolved somewhat over the years. And when PIA became a thing, and then everyone shifted towards using BT infrastructure, how again did that shift your view of the returns that you could make? And I guess when you look at it's really two questions connected. When you look at where you are now in terms of the key metrics, cost to build, ARPO, the rest of it, how do you feel about, where the business sits today?
So I think we're super comfortable. We're pretty proud of the fact that we started out, digging everything. We've moved over to quite a bit of significant PIA, and we're now in the third evolution of the network, which is sort of our rural deployment, subsidized by the government. In many ways, probably about the same as Portugal, some 20%. And through that, we've kept our build costs pretty flat through that entire thing, and we've just gone faster and faster every year. And we're now at a very, very comfortable kind of 1 million homes a year beat rate. We've had to shift the focus from kind of the urban centres out towards rural, and that'll probably take a little while to settle in. But as you say, we took the time to build a machine, and then we let the machine run, right? That's really critical. Anyone in this room could build a 5,000 home fibre network, right? It's really straightforward. The problem is going from 5,000 to 1 million to 5 million.
Yeah, the ramp up.
That's where the issue is, right? So we've been super happy because we've kept our costs flat. We've been able to build faster, and we've been able to move into new areas of the business as those have evolved. And we've been starting to see the take-up now start to happen. We announced we're past 400,000 customers on the network pretty recently. That's heading pretty comfortably towards 500,000, which is a nice round number for us. And we're up to, I think, now 55 ISPs on the network. So the ARPUs are in the right place. We're seeing lots of experimentation in terms of the go-to-market through the channel. Some of that works, some of that doesn't. And there have been a few surprises along the way. I think we're super comfortable with where we are.
And Carlos, I guess your different issue is, in a sense, you've got maturity to a certain extent. I mean, again, a couple of questions. Where are you in the decommissioning of the legacy network, both, sort of POPs, voice, and just copper itself? And then, as you move forward, I like the point that was made earlier that, you never stand still in terms of CapEx. I mean, the reality is the CapEx just keeps coming. So what's the next phase of network investment? Is it that actually, for example, the ONTs are just too, they all need, at some stage everything's going to need replacing, right?
Yeah, in fact, we are doing the copper decommissioning, of course. Today we have less than 10%, 15%, 10% of customers still in copper. Just that. I guess in more 2-3 years we will gonna burn all that. But
do you kind of force migrate people off? Because you end up with these little pockets of, I'm not going to say grannies or whatever, but you end up with people who just don't want to move.
There's always people that don't want to move, but of course we act commercially, and we already, under brackets, dismissed some customers, because if they don't want, I can't have a central office open because of 2 or 3 stubborn customers. So I need to offer them to someone, and I tell them, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, but you are the last one, and I need to shut the door. And usually we have some kind of specialists to do that kind of wording with them, and we had to shut off a few of them, but it's part of the job, no problem. But now the challenge is exactly because of all this digitalization, is to jump over XGS PON that we are doing. And more important is not if it is XGS 100, whatever. It's the Wi-Fi connectivity inside home. It's to give our customers the best experience in terms of wireless connectivity inside home.
And what are you doing?
Wi-Fi 7, Wi-Fi 6, and now Wi-Fi 7. And we're going to start to act over Wi-Fi 7 with Wi-Fi sensing to jump with other services, increasing the share of wallet always.
And are the customers paying for that product, or are you?
We are developing that now,
Right.
the Wi-Fi sensing. We pretend to monetize that with solutions inside our customers' premises.
And Clayton, I guess, you know, from you're a pure wholesale play, right? So when you look at that customer experience, which is part of, you know, in a sense, the churn is coming from the ISPs and the service providers, but how does that work in terms of the ultimate customer experience, which obviously is where the monetization comes from? Because if, you know, if it's something to do with the ISP, who presumably it's their router rather than, you know, your product, how you don't have the ultimate end-to-end control, I guess, that Carlos has got over the economic value chain, if you like.
No, we don't, but we're involved in the most important part of that interaction, which is the first time it gets connected, our people in the home, right? And we're there on behalf of the ISP, and we need to make that clear. We're not front and center about the logos or anything like that, but we have to make sure that that experience is a beautiful touch point, right? Because certainly in the UK, if you don't like your ISP, you can just walk away within 14 days, right? And that's the worst case situation for anybody. We've spent some money to put fibre in, we've annoyed the customer, and they just walk away, right? No one gets any money out of that. That's horrible. So partly we spent a lot of time making sure that, one, we do some really complicated customer service things, like when we say we're going to turn up at 2 o'clock, then we turn up at 2 o'clock, right? That seems, today that seems pretty straightforward. A few years back, that was pretty revolutionary in the UK, right? And we make sure that the customer service is working. We make sure that everything's kind of working in the house when we go away. Yes, all this Wi-Fi stuff is the domain of the ISP for a period of time. But I think we are trying to help the ISPs understand what best practice is in this space. You know, we pay a lot of attention to this because we know that nobody says my CityFibre service is great. What they say is my Wi-Fi works really well.
Yeah.
They don't even know that we exist, right? So it's in our interests to not only make sure that the house is well connected, but all that stuff is working as well. Some ISPs are more open to help in that space than others. But the great thing about being a wholesaler is you get to run 50 experiments at the same time, right? We have dirt cheap kind of providers who will provide you a gigabit for £29, and they are very much not in the sort of, I'm going to optimize the Wi-Fi space. And we have others that are much higher up the price band, and they want to make sure that the customer experience is beautiful, and we support both of those.
But you don't have the ultimate control over what happens inside the home.
No, we don't.
Just to ask about ARPO, and again, Clayton first. I mean, we've been through this period of inflation. Again, this relates to returns, obviously. We went through this period of high inflation. From a wholesale perspective, I guess your obvious comparator is Openreach. And whenever an ISP is doing business with you, they're probably having a parallel conversation with Openreach.
I'm sure some of them are.
Maybe. How do you see the potential for ARPU growth moving forward as you when you look at your model over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Look, I think you can probably track decent level CPI, 2-3%, but above that, customers get really prickly about price increases. During the inflation spike the last 2 years, we saw a number of retail ISPs try to push through 14-16% price increases, and they ate all of that in terms of customers walking away, cancellations, and so forth, right? I don't think anybody who put through a 14% price increase saw an average increase of more than a few percent at best. So customers are, they have choice now. It's great, and they will move. So I think, yes, you can kind of track reasonable levels of CPI. Inflation spikes, you're just going to have to kind of deal with that.
But is it a sort of BT minus approach in your strategy, really?
Yeah, look, we'll always be cheaper, and that's for a number of reasons. One is to be competitive. We're the newcomer, and incumbents do have some trust behind them, so we have to be price competitive. But I don't always have to be cheapest just on the kind of monthly rental, right? If I install, and this is what we do, 97% of the time we install the service correctly on the day. If you're with BT, that's more like a number that starts with 8. That means if you're an ISP customer of ours, once every 2 weeks, a customer will complain. And if you're using OpenReach, that happens every day. That is a huge cost difference and a saving right up front, right? So it's not simply the rental that you need to look at, and we are competitive in rental, but the whole set of cost savings you get through the lifetime of the customer. Not calling you, making sure that it's installed on time. When it breaks, someone turns up and fixes it in advance. We have some proactive repair stuff, which is like magic, right? We've had situations where someone's been outside. There's a tweet about this that you can go and read. Guy was digging in the garden on a Saturday, put his spade through the fibre, and he was like, that's annoying. I'm going to have to deal with that. We saw that. There was a repair person nearby. We dispatched someone. He hadn't left his garden yet, and someone turned up and said, we're here to fix the fibre, right? He didn't log a fault. That customer is a customer of ours for like life. His grandkids are going to buy from us, right?
It's quite spooky as well, yeah.
It is quite spooky. And by the way, that's the cheapest possible way to deliver fibre from the ISP's point of view. They didn't even take a phone call.
Yeah. And Carlos, if you look at the sort of cost versus ARPU equation, obviously it's quite different for you in a sense. I mean, you've got this huge now connected base who I guess, tell us a little bit more about that base. I mean, you said that some people are still taking maybe 50 to 100 meg, but are you really pushing them all towards a gig and then maybe 10 gig? And can you achieve, as you go through that journey, the ultimate kind of nirvana, which is ARPU, an upgrade in ARPU by offering them more? Are they just basically getting more for the same price?
The question is like, maybe 20 years ago you bought a Pentium computer, laptop for some pounds. Today you buy the same computer with a much better processor by the same price. Okay? And that is what happened in Portugal in telco. No one wants to pay more for more bandwidth. They want to get more bandwidth for the same. So that is the big fight we have in the market, is exactly continue to improve, continue to spend money, and with the same ARPU. Or even lower, because you have newcomers, attackers. In Portugal, we're going to have Digi by the end of this year. Digi in Spain caused a lot of pain in all the established operators. So we are always being pushed down, not up. Reason why we defend ourselves with bundles. With bundles from everything. And to have bundles, we need to have customer trust. To get customer trust, we need to have this kind of mindset he shared with us. We need to avoid problems, we need to avoid malfunctions, we need to avoid a lot of things. Today, in terms of AI, let's say, we invest a lot in pattern recognition. We collect everything from our network and we avoid problems in the customer even before the customer felt something. We autocorrect, we do whatever we can to avoid cost. It is the only way to face this war about ARPU. Because
and with fibre, as opposed to copper, how are you seeing this reduction in operating costs? Is it really dramatic?
It's huge. It's huge. I have my figures. It's huge. I can tell you about people. How many people we had 20 years ago on the field, and how many people we have today. It's easy to do that calculation. It's something relation something between 1 to 5, okay, at least. Okay, so operators need to do that kind of calculations. They need to believe that, in fact, fiber is a crystal. Okay, it's not a metal. There's no oxide. There's no problems in connections, okay? So in the long term, in terms of TCO, it's totally different, of course.
And can you put a figure on the percentage of
It's 1 to 5 in terms of cost.
really as much as that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And in terms of energy, it goes to 1 to 7 in terms of energy savings. In terms of space, goes to 1 to 4, 1 to 5 also. In terms of central office, we had a reduction in terms of POPs, in terms of central offices, from 1,850 to 498 POPs. Okay, and one thing that is really very, very exciting, when you go to a small village, that people becomes in the center of the world because of the fiber. In copper, they were apart from everything. When you put fiber, there's a lot of developments in those municipalities in terms of B2B. Small companies, they start to do business, local business, because in terms of connectivity, there's no distance. And fiber gives that. I'm sorry if I speak so passionate about fiber, but it is what it is. Fiber removes the distance from the telco ecosystem.
No, absolutely. And on your point about legacy, I remember about 20 years ago, I was asked to present at a BT management conference, and there were like 3,000 people in the NEC or something like that. And he would only let me in for my piece because they didn't want me to hear what they were talking about. And when I went in, they were talking about waterlogging of all things in the network. And it clearly was a bigger problem. I never even thought about it and clearly it was a massive problem because they had a number on the screen which was like 300 or 400 million pounds or something they spent every year just sort of sorting out network that was degraded by stuff like water. So you just don't have any of that issue with fiber.
Of course, we don't want to have water in our optical network, but if there is water in the optical network, it's not a big problem. We have time to solve it. In copper, you need to rush.
So I'm going to ask, I'm not going to talk a lot about regulation because everyone will get very bored very quickly, but it is a massive issue for you and for you. And I mean, if you look at the structure, you know, maybe in 20 years' time we'll write a book about the UK market and how things could have been different if we'd followed the French example or whatever. But we are where we are. I mean, when you look at the structure of the UK market today, not just from a regulatory perspective, but also you're fully funded, but a bunch of altnets who are desperately struggling to raise new capital. How do you see that market structure evolving that will obviously again improve your returns? Or are we going to consolidate down to a bit like the cable companies, 2 or 3 regional players, and then everyone merges?
Yeah, look, there's either a regional world or there's 3 players going forward, I think is where we end up. And I think the latter of those 2 is much more likely. My suspicion is that BT doesn't go bankrupt in the next 2 or 3 years. Controversial, I know, but that's the kind of... I'd love to be proved wrong on that, by the way. But and Virgin is doing, you know, a bunch of stuff to try and make itself relevant and kind of getting there, you know, at whatever pace that they're doing. The altnet space is a mess because a set of people kind of approach this on a network basis and not a business case basis. Not everybody. There are definitely some businesses out there that are kind of well thought through and put together. But we have far too many altnets who have basically said, I'm not building anymore. I'm switching to monetization and have no real strategy to monetize beyond kind of discounting. And that's not a sustainable situation. Many of those have been well built. Many of them have been put in place by people who, you know, meant well and did their best to put that stuff in place. And I think that presents a real opportunity for consolidation and growth. We do feel at CityFibre that's the next phase of what we're doing.
So more M&A.
More M&A. We closed a small one with Lit Fibre earlier this year. We're in the process of kind of plugging that all into our systems. It's going super well. Great people, great network, just didn't really have a path to profitability. We make that possible. So, yeah, I think our view is 2 to 3 players. We're definitely one of those 3.
And Carlos, how do you see your relationship with regulation? Because clearly you look at it from the other way, which is, you know, you're the big incumbent, and presumably competition isn't necessarily something that you want to foster.
As you can imagine, as an incumbent, a regulator is not exactly a piece of pie to us. But fortunately, in Portugal, thanks to the duct rental offer and poles we had, they let us to keep optical fiber network out from that. And it was a very smart decision, because if for some reason they have done something to us, the investment would stop. Because there's no way to do, at least in Portugal, and I guess in all other countries, there's no way to monetize over a regulated fiber network. There's too much pressure over that to increase with that one. So what we have done, 4 years ago, we spin off our unit of optical fiber into an open fiber network. It is called Fast Fiber, and MEO, it's our commercial name today. We are customers from that, let's say, CityFibre unit. Okay. Now the struggle is to bring other operators to that network. Because mainly in Portugal, we have in 80% of the country, we have at least 2 optical fiber networks in overlay and 1 DOCSIS. Okay? Operators prefer to have their own network than having complexity over the handover points to get access to the fiber network. It's complex. Or you have an open operator like CityFibre, and everybody goes to that operator, and you have a lean operation, or you prefer to get your own optical fiber because of the dynamics you get from that.
Well, look, I think we've got time for a couple of questions before we finish up. So any burning questions?
It's okay, darling.
So this was of Carlos. I'm not very sure the Starlink has started operation in Portugal.
Sorry?
Has Starlink started operation in Portugal?
Yes.
And do you see any disruptions in your market because of things like Starlink or FWA by the mobile operators?
So the question was about
Yes,
Starlink and
Starlink.
whether you
No.
see any competitive pressure from...
No, in fact, I'm offering Starlink to those stubborn customers I want to get rid of.
It's a great answer. Do you see, I mean, FWA in the UK has always been a conundrum, really. I mean, it's a conundrum in a lot of markets, to be fair. You know, fixed, sort of 4.5G, 5G solutions. Have you ever looked at it and thought, you know, as some form of infill technology, we should be buying one of the altnets that's gone into that? Or?
I look at it every 6 months, right? Regular as clockwork. And every time, I think our conclusion is that it's simply too high an operating cost, right? What fibre does is it just drives OpEx out of the business fundamentally. Every 7 to 10 years, you have to go and spend £100 million on kit, but otherwise the network just sits there. And FWA just has a different set of operating characteristics. I mean, it's a good, you know, it links to the finance question, right? Fundamentally, what I build is a dam, right, or a kind of, you know, a wind farm or something like that. Lots of money up front, and then virtually no operating costs for the long term, right? FWA has a completely different structure in terms of the way it works. Much less money up front, but it's a much more expensive business to run as you move along. So it doesn't work for us. In the UK, certainly, it hasn't to date proved very efficient. There are some places where it's starting to look interesting. I met with Saudi Telecom a few months ago. They're being destroyed by FWA because they allocated 200 megahertz to their 5G network. The average download speed for a mobile phone is 900 megabits in Saudi Arabia. So, you know, but that doesn't exist here, right? No one wants to swap their Wi-Fi, which is beautiful, for 5G. The two work in complement.
Yeah.
Any other question?
Is that you, just you, Annie?
It's a niche solution.
You're the incumbent as well.
I'm an incumbent for an altnet. It's a bit of a funny title for you this far down the line. Clayton, I just wondered how much BT selling full fibre when it wasn't full fibre has. I can't believe Ofcom let them get away with that. I think it's astounding. How much has that messed the British market up? Because now, I mean, I think according to the FTTH Council Europe, I think take-up rates are about 50%. In the UK, they're 30%. And BT is the incumbent. It told people they got full fibre, and now they're trying to sell them full fibre. How's that work?
Well,
I just wonder if it's affected you, really.
it has, right? We spent a lot of money on lawyers to deal with this exact problem, and the UK solved the problem by just waiting until it became irrelevant in so many other ways, right? This is the problem with regulation and the advertising standards and so forth, is they're always fighting last year's war, right? You know, we have now the EU kind of attacking Microsoft for its bundling of Teams. Well done, you already lost that battle, right? I mean, whatever you... Way too late. It's the same here, right? Yes, it was a travesty that, you know, BT and Virgin, between them, were both able to talk about full fibre services when, you know, it was manifestly not the case. But now we're over. We're on the other side of that river now. Everyone's talking the fibre game, and as a result, everyone's now driving into fibre, and that rising tide lifts all boats, including ours.
I'm not going to end on politics, but if the Conservatives do lose the election, I might put a bet on that, actually. It's a possibility at least, right? If they do, we could look back and say, you know, the last 14 years since 2010, would things have been different if, you know, the whole environment had been different, it had been regulated differently, but it's a conversation over a beer or a glass of Portuguese red. So I think we're out of time, aren't we?
I'm afraid that you are, gentlemen.
Yeah.
But Chris, Clayton and Carlos, thank you very much.
Thank you.